Early in the morning, the sun is just rising over Norfolk Southern's Oakwood Yard. Work is at its peak as CN makes its interchange with NS, and the chart receives most of its automotive parts for the day. Pictured here is CN L572, daily interchange service from Flat Rock. As 572 occupies the yard's north lead, the yard switcher pulls out from the south. This job typically utilizes remote control power, but today has a crew on board. Today I'm tagging with longtime friend Chris Cole for some Wabash Line Railfanning and to gawk at some storms set to come in the afternoon. Working today is NS 1626, a former Norfolk and Western high hood SD40-2. These are normally used in home service, with Wayne County being the only place on NS you can see them without trespassing. Towards the back of the yard is NS 953, the office car special. Built with NS executives, the train would stop here in Oakwood for 4 days before departing to Kansas City. Leading the consist are NS Heritage Units 8100, the Nickel Plate, and 1070, the Wabash. Unfortunately, due to 8100 having a rear anti-climber, 1070 would have to trail down the Wabash line. As many rail fans gathered between Allen Park and Romulus, we headed about 4 miles further west to Belleville. About 20 minutes after we arrived, 953's headlight would appear in the distance. We'd start heading back east towards Romulus, but wouldn't make it far before spotting another train. The train in question is CPKC 231, daily manifest from Toronto, Ontario to Belleville, Illinois. CPKC traffic through the Mitten is mostly autoracks, and today is no different, with 82 of 113 cars being autoracks. With nothing on the Detroit district, we'd head down to New Boston. There, CSX M565 would be seen working with a lone YN2-8. After about 15 minutes, traffic would pick up again. We opted to shoot back north to Romulus, where the Saginaw Sub and Detroit District meet. Crossing the Diamond is our second extra of the day, a combination of 2 grain trains from Lake State Railway. Originating from central Michigan, LSRC would bring them down to Wixom as 2 separate trains before CSX takes them as one whole train to their destination. As soon as the grainer cleared the control point, 565 would get a medium clear to continue north to Plymouth. By the time I crossed the tracks, they could already be seen rocketing out of New Boston. Leading this 565 is CSX C40-8W number 7836. Built in December of 1992, 7836 has served on CSX consistently until January 2024, when it was sidelined for 14 months. In March of 2025, it and 45 other Dash 8s would be reactivated due to power shortages. It is also the first CSX Dash 8 I've seen in almost 6 years, with the last one being in September of 2019. Not too long after 565 passed, traffic on the Detroit district would pick up again, with an eastbound high green shining over Main 1. CPKC 230, counterpart of the 231 we saw earlier. The engineer on this train was quite friendly, giving a horn show for the not yet diminished crowd of rail fans. Positioning near the diamond, you can really hear the clacking as the axles slam across the flangeways. 11th hour, we'd get our 7th train of the day. ID'd as L314, this train originates as Z127 out of Lake State's Coldwater Yard in Flint. From Flint, the train goes south through Holly and Milford before terminating in Wixom. Later in the day, L314 takes the train down CSX's half of the Saginaw sub and eventually Walbridge, Ohio. Once the diamond was clear, the Wabash signals lit up again, this time with an advanced approach indication. That indication was for NS-120, daily manifest from Kansas City to Detroit. A good half of this train is for my home territory over in Sterling Heights. Up there lies Chrysler's stamping plant and assembly plants. The line of chassis are for the assembly plant at 17 Mile. Behind those are 60-foot auto part box cars for the stamping plant at 15 Mile. Also seen are gondolas for scrap metal, and finally auto racks for finished vehicles. Once in Oakwood, NSB 76 will take these cars up the CSAO to Conrail's North Yard and Sterling Yard respectively. The 120's crew would end up terminating here, since both mains were occupied ahead by the 230 from earlier, as well as oncoming traffic. After sitting in the car to beat the heat and charge my phone, this CPKC 529 would sneak up on me. 529 is the empty counterpart of 528, which brings bulk ethanol loads over to Global Petroleum in Albany, New York for shipping overseas. Two more trains would pass around midday, however we wouldn't set up for them due to a lack of a radio. After some walking and picture taking along the south side of town, we'd hear a K5L in the distance. Taking the siding is CSXM 566, eastbound equivalent of the 565 we saw earlier. Once in New Boston, it will grab several outbound cuts of autoracks for New York. Just a few minutes after 566 passed, Chris would spot 120's new crew boarding the head end. Seeing this, we'd head east about 2 miles to get ahead of the train. With storms now quickly approaching, I'd brace for the impending shower as 120 raced along the gust front. Chris would jump back in his vehicle, and it was about this time I'd start getting slammed by heavy winds and pea-sized hail. Little did I know at the time, a tornado was underway just 2 miles southeast of my house, inflicting EF0 damage to the city of Fraser. We would take shelter under a car wash back in Romulus to wait for the rain to clear. While waiting, it would continue to pour like a Thai monsoon for another dozen minutes. If you're railfanning along any line for a day, you're bound to meet a dead period where nothing runs for several hours. Once the afternoon hits, the Wabash typically dies for at least 2 hours. Chris managed to sleep for an hour and a half before this B-71 finally appeared. Head back east for B-71's return trip. Overhead, you can see a Delta airliner flying into DTW. This spot is incredibly photogenic for its ability to produce trains, planes, and automobiles all in a single frame. As the evening approached, we'd head back to Romulus one last time for NS-121. NS-121 is the counterpart of NS-120. However, unlike 120, it originates directly out of Sterling Heights. 121 leaves Sterling Yard around 8:30, works around the CSAO, and finally departs Oakwood between 16 and 1800. the second run of storms approaching, we'd make this second CPKC 230 our last train of the day. Trailing behind the JAVO is a rare KCSM Grey Ghost, the first I've ever seen in 7 years of rail fanning.